It was supposed to be just another quiet evening for the Dalton family. The sun had dipped low, casting a soft golden light over the neighborhood. Birds were chirping, the breeze was gentle, and the newly built construction site behind their house stood silent after the workers had gone for the day. That Mr. and Mrs. Dalton often took their 2-year-old daughter, Ella, fondly called Baby, by everyone in the family on these little strolls before dinner. Ella loved to wander along the dirt path behind their backyard, stopping to admire every rock, flower, and puddle as if discovering treasure. Her tiny hands would grasp leaves, her laughter filling the air as her parents followed just a few steps behind. But something unusual happened that evening. Ella had been walking happily, one hand holding her stuffed bunny, when she suddenly froze. Near the edge of the cement wall bordering the construction site, she turned her head slightly, tilted her ear, and stood very still. Then she pointed at the wall. "Mama," she whispered, her little finger aimed directly at the concrete. "Doggy?" Mrs. Dalton looked at her husband, confused. Did she say doggy? Before either parent could speak, Ella pointed again, this time with more urgency. "Doggy, inside." Mr. Dalton raised an eyebrow, then walked closer to the unfinished wall. It looked like any other section of gray cement blocks, smooth, solid, and quiet. But as he leaned closer, he heard something faint, very faint. A small, muffled sound, like a soft whine. He turned back toward his wife. "Did you hear that?" They both fell silent. There it was again. A tiny, high-pitched whimper, barely audible, but unmistakably real, coming from behind the cement wall. At first, they thought it might be a trick of the wind, or maybe an animal nearby. But as they moved closer, the sound didn't fade. In fact, it seemed to grow clearer. A weak, desperate cry from something that didn't want to be forgotten. Mr. Dalton knelt and pressed his ear to the cold cement. The sound wasn't just real. It was coming from inside. Inside the wall. His heart skipped. "There's something alive in there," he said quietly. "Something's trapped." Mrs. Dalton scooped Ella into her arms and backed away from the structure. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, trying to make sense of the impossible. How could anything be inside that wall? She asked, but her voice shook with worry. They immediately called animal control and emergency services. The dispatcher confirmed help would be on the way, but warned that delays were likely due to other active calls. Mr. Dalton's instincts kicked in. He couldn't just stand there waiting. The sound coming from the wall was growing fainter by the minute. He sprinted back to the house and returned moments later with a flashlight, crowbar, and small sledgehammer. By now, a few neighbors had noticed the commotion and gathered nearby. Some offered to help. Others looked on in silence, unsure of what was unfolding. Ella, still in her mother's arms, stared intensely at the wall. She wasn't frightened. In fact, she looked calm, focused, even as if she already knew someone was waiting behind the concrete. Mr. Dalton didn't hesitate. He picked a spot where the sound seemed loudest and began to chip away at the cement with his crowbar. The metal scraped against stone, sending sparks into the fading dusk. Each strike echoed louder than the last. No one could have guessed what they were about to find, or how one tiny toddler's curious pause would lead to a rescue that would touch hearts across the entire town. Mr. Dalton's crowbar struck the wall again, and the sound it made was sharp and jarring. Cement dust clouded the air as pieces chipped away. Every time he paused to listen, that faint, heartbreaking whimper returned, soft but full of fear. It was impossible to ignore now. Whatever was behind that wall was scared, trapped, and running. Out of time, Ella continued pointing from her mother's arms, her eyes never leaving the wall. She whispered again, "Doggy's sad." Neighbors gathered slowly, drawn in by the noise and the strange Sight of a man breaking apart a wall with nothing but hand tools and desperation. One elderly man approached cautiously. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's something trapped inside," Mr. Dalton replied without stopping. "I think it's a dog." Another neighbor added, "You sure? Inside the wall?" Mr. Dalton didn't look up. "I heard it. My daughter heard it first. It's real." Mrs. Dalton nodded in agreement, holding Ella tightly. "It's crying." Someone else called out, "Shouldn't we wait for help?" "I already called," Mr. Dalton said, still striking the wall. "They said it'll be a while. I'm not going to wait while something dies in there." The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. By now, a small crowd had formed. Some neighbors held flashlights. One man ran home to bring a drill and offered it to Mr. Dalton, who gladly took it. The noise of the drill echoed through the evening air, drawing more attention, but no one complained. Everyone could now hear it clearly, the soft, heartbreaking whimper of an animal that had been trapped for far too long. Dust coated Mr. Dalton's face and arms. His muscles ached, but he didn't stop. He carefully avoided going too deep, not wanting to hurt whatever was inside. The block finally cracked open just a little, and when he peered through the small hole, he saw two frightened eyes staring back at him. "Everyone back up," he called out, voice shaking. Mrs. Dalton gasped. "You saw it?" "It's a puppy," he said, stepping back for a breath. "It's really in there. Oh my God." There was a wave of murmurs from the onlookers, some of whom were already tearing up. It was hard to imagine how a living creature had ended up sealed inside a solid wall of cement blocks. The situation didn't make sense, but the whimpering dog was proof that it had happened. Ella reached her tiny hand toward the opening and whispered again, "Come out, doggy. It's okay." Mr. Dalton resumed working, this time even more carefully. Inch by inch, he widened the opening. Every few seconds, he stopped to check on the dog, making sure it hadn't panicked or passed out from fear or exhaustion. The puppy's breathing was labored, but its eyes stayed fixed on the hole, as if sensing freedom was finally near. More help arrived, a local off-duty firefighter who happened to live nearby. After seeing what was going on, he stepped in to assist. Together, they broke apart more of the cement, widening the space just enough. Then, with a gasp from the crowd, a dirt-covered snout pushed through the hole. Everyone went silent. It was a young German shepherd, skinny and shaking. Slowly, cautiously, the puppy crawled out through the broken wall. Its paws were raw, its fur matted with cement dust and dried mud. It blinked in the light, unsure if this was real. Ella reached out softly and said one word that brought more than a few people to tears. "Friend." Mrs. Dalton dropped to her knees, holding Ella with one arm and gently stroking the puppy's head with the other. Mr. Dalton stood back, eyes glassy, chest rising and falling with deep relief. No one spoke. For a moment. No one had to. The baby had been right. There really was a dog inside the wall. As the dust settled and the puppy lay trembling on the ground, a quiet awe fell over the crowd. No one had ever witnessed something like this before. People stood with their hands over their mouths, eyes wide, hearts pounding. The small German shepherd pup, barely more than skin and bones, had just been pulled from what could have easily been his grave. Mr. Dalton crouched down beside the dog, careful not to frighten it further. The pup's eyes were dull, glassy from exhaustion and fear. It didn't even try to run. It simply lay there, its sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. "He's so weak," Mr. Dalton murmured, brushing dust from its fur. "He must have been in there for days." Mrs. Dalton wrapped her arm around Ella, who looked down at the puppy with quiet concern. "Is he gonna be okay?" she asked softly. "We need to get him to a vet right now," Mrs. Dalton said. He's barely holding on. One of the neighbors, a young man named Tyler, stepped forward. "I've got a truck. Let's go now. There's an emergency clinic just 10 minutes away." Without wasting a second, Mr. Dalton gently scooped the pup into his arms. The dog didn't resist. It simply sighed, as if finally letting go of its fear now that someone cared enough to carry it. The Daltons and Tyler jumped into the truck, while Mrs. Dalton stayed behind with Ella and the crowd, promising updates. As the truck sped off, neighbors began speculating. How did the dog even get in there? One woman asked. Was it born there? Another guessed. No, someone else said. That wall was sealed a week ago. I saw them pour the cement myself. It was a chilling thought. Had the dog been exploring the site and gotten trapped during construction? Had no one noticed its cries before this? Or worse, had it been put in there intentionally? The idea made many shiver, but no one voiced it out loud. Meanwhile, at the emergency clinic, the staff moved quickly. The moment Mr. Dalton walked in with the limp, cement-covered pup in his arms, the nurses leapt into action. They rushed him to the back for fluids, a full checkup, and x-rays. The vet, Dr. Lee, came out after 20 minutes, wiping her hands. "He's in rough shape," she said seriously. "He's severely dehydrated, and he hasn't eaten in days. But he's stable. It's a miracle, honestly. One more day in that wall, and he wouldn't have made it." Mr. Dalton exhaled deeply, emotions finally catching up with him. "Can we visit him?" Dr. Lee smiled gently. "You can, but let him rest tonight. He needs sleep, care, and time." "He's lucky someone heard him." Mr. Dalton smiled, shaking his head. "It wasn't me. It was my daughter. She heard him first." She pointed at that wall, like she knew. "I would have just walked right past." Later that night, back at home, Ella asked the same question over and over. "Where's the doggy?" Mrs. Dalton showed her a picture the vet had texted. "He's okay, baby. He's getting better." Ella nodded with satisfaction, then quietly said, "He's coming home." It was a bold claim, but somehow, no one doubted her. In just a few short hours, the Daltons had gone from a simple evening walk to an unbelievable rescue story. A toddler had noticed what no adult did. A father had torn through stone with his bare hands. And a forgotten dog had taken its first breath of freedom thanks to one tiny voice that refused to walk away. Asterisk. The next morning, the Dalton household stirred earlier than usual. Ella was already up, standing near the front window in her pajamas, her stuffed bunny dangling from one hand. She didn't say much, but her eyes stayed fixed on the driveway like she was waiting for something, or someone. Mr. Dalton had barely sipped his coffee when his phone buzzed. It was a message from the vet. "He's awake and responding well. You can visit any time today." Within the hour, the entire family was in the car, headed to the emergency clinic. Ella sat in her car seat quietly, occasionally mumbling to herself, "Doggie's okay. Doggie's okay." Mrs. Dalton gently smiled and glanced at her husband. They were still processing everything that had happened the night before, and now it was time to see what came next. When they arrived, Dr. Lee greeted them warmly and led them to a quiet room in the back. There, lying on a soft blanket, was the same German Shepherd puppy, but now he looked a little brighter. His fur had been cleaned, revealing patches of tan and black. His eyes were no longer empty, but curious. When he saw Ella, his ears twitched slightly. Ella slowly walked toward him, her steps light and gentle. The puppy lifted his head then, with great effort, struggled into a sitting position. It was a simple moment, but it shattered everyone in the room. The pup's tail gave the weakest wag. He looked straight into Ella's eyes and gave a soft, almost inaudible whine. Mrs. Dalton gasped, covering her mouth. Dr. Lee nodded softly. That's the first time he's reacted to anyone like that. Ella crouched down, reached out her tiny hand, and gently touched his paw. "Hi, friend," she whispered. Mr. Dalton swallowed hard. I think he remembers her voice. Over the next 20 minutes, the room became a space of healing. The puppy leaned into Ella's touch, closed his eyes, and sighed. For the first time, he looked safe. Dr. Lee explained that the pup, estimated to be around 5 months old, had likely been trapped inside the wall for at least 3 days, possibly longer. He had minor injuries, dehydration, and would need antibiotics and rest, but there was hope. And hope, she said, was rare in cases like these. But the question everyone avoided still lingered. How did he get in the wall? Back home, the neighborhood was buzzing. The story had spread quickly, and people were stopping by the site with flowers, dog treats, even handmade signs. One sign read, "Thank you, Ella. You saved a life." Some local news outlets had already picked up the story. A reporter had contacted Mr. Dalton, asking for an interview. But the Daltons weren't interested in attention. They were focused on one thing: getting the pup healthy and home. That night, Mr. Dalton sat on the porch, Ella asleep in his lap. He looked out toward the construction site, now taped off and quiet. In his mind, he kept seeing the moment the pup emerged from the wall, his shaking body, the dust in the air, and Ella's small voice saying, "Friend." It was a moment that broke hearts. Yes, but it also restored something rare in the world. Faith. That innocence still notices what the rest of the world forgets. That a baby's voice can change fate. That a weak cry behind a wall can still be heard. And the dog? He was no longer just a mystery or a miracle. He was Ella's friend now. 2 days after the rescue, the German Shepherd pup, now affectionately called Shadow by Ella, was finally cleared to go home with the Daltons. Though he still moved slowly and tired easily, he had already begun to show signs of recovery. His eyes were brighter, his appetite had returned, and the bond forming between him and Ella was something no one could explain. But while the family focused on nursing Shadow back to health, another matter weighed heavily on Mr. Dalton's mind: the question that no one could shake. How had a dog ended up inside a wall? It wasn't just strange. It was alarming. Mr. Dalton decided to return to the construction site alone. He wanted to retrace the steps, examine the area more carefully, and maybe find some answers. The site remained mostly untouched since the night of the rescue, with caution tape surrounding the section of wall he had broken through. The cracked cement blocks lay scattered on the ground like a broken puzzle. It was quiet now, eerily so. He knelt and examined the wall closely. The section where Shadow had been trapped was clearly sealed tight, no gaps, no loose bricks. Whoever had poured the cement had done a clean job. Too clean. Then he noticed something odd. A faint scrape mark on the inside edge of the remaining wall, like claws, repeated scratches. A desperate attempt to escape. Mr. Dalton stood slowly, his eyes narrowing. The claw marks weren't just evidence of being trapped. They told a story. Shadow hadn't simply wandered into a small crevice. He had been sealed in, and judging by how deep some of the scratches were, he had been trapped while fully conscious. A chill crept down his spine. Back at home, Mrs. Dalton was cleaning up when she noticed Shadow sitting near the door, staring. He wasn't barking, but he seemed tense, alert. His ears were perked forward, his tail still, almost like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. She walked over and crouched down next to him. "It's okay," she whispered, stroking his back. "You're safe now." He blinked, then leaned his head gently against her leg. Later that evening, Mr. Dalton gathered the family in the living room. "I need to tell you both something," he said, looking between his wife and Ella. "I went back to the wall today." Mrs. Dalton's expression tightened. "Did you find something?" He nodded. The wall was too perfect, too sealed. There's no way Shadow got in there by accident. Someone had to have put him there. Mrs. Dalton's hand went to her mouth in shock. You mean on purpose? Mr. Dalton nodded grimly. That's the only explanation that makes sense. And based on the scratch marks, he was trying to get out. He was awake when they closed it up. Silence fell. Ella looked up from the couch and simply said, "Bad person." Shadow, lying at her feet, let out a soft growl. They knew now this wasn't just a lucky rescue. It was something deeper, something darker. Someone had tried to erase a life quietly, without a trace. But they hadn't counted on a toddler's instincts, or a family willing to dig through stone for the truth. Shadow wasn't just a survivor. He was a victim of something sinister, and they had unknowingly uncovered it. And though they didn't know who had done it or why, one thing was certain. This story was far from over. The following morning, Mr. Dalton made a quiet call to the city's building inspector. He explained the discovery, the sealed wall, the trapped puppy, and his growing suspicion that something cruel had happened at the site. The inspector agreed to meet him in person that afternoon. Shadow, still weak but steadily improving, curled up beside Ella on the living room rug. He rarely left her side now. If she moved to another room, he followed. If she sat outside to play, he'd sit next to her, ears twitching at every sound. Mrs. Dalton watched them from the window with a heavy heart. He trusts her like he's known her forever, she said to Mr. Dalton. Like she saved his soul. She did, he replied. She saved all of us in a way. That afternoon, Mr. Dalton returned to the site with the building inspector, Mr. Kellen. They examined the wall closely. Mr. Dalton pointed out the claw marks, the smoothness of the seal, and the timeline of the construction. This section was finished last Thursday, Mr. Kellen said, checking his clipboard. 3 workers were assigned to this wall. Could this have happened by accident? Mr. Dalton asked. Mr. Kellen hesitated. Theoretically, maybe. But the space is too small. No gaps. No broken bricks. If the dog got in while it was being built, someone would have noticed. He'd have barked or moved around. There's no way they wouldn't have heard. Mr. Dalton clenched his jaw. Then someone knew. Someone sealed him in on purpose. Kellen nodded slowly. I hate to say it, but yes. I'll file an official report. They exchanged a long look, one of shared disbelief and quiet resolve. Later that day, a knock came at the Daltons' door. It was Tyler, the neighbor, who had driven them to the vet on rescue night. I've been thinking, he said. My cousin works for the crew that built that wall. He said there was a guy fired a few days ago. Showed up drunk, started yelling. At the site manager, got escorted off the property. Mr. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Before or after the wall was finished? Day before, Tyler said. He didn't take it well. Cursed everyone out. Threatened to make them pay. The pieces were clicking together. Could it be that this man fired, and furious, had found the stray dog wandering near the site and used him to take revenge? Sealing a helpless animal inside a wall might have been his way of sending a twisted message. Mr. Dalton's stomach turned. The thought of someone using an innocent creature to lash out was beyond cruel. It was dangerous. He reported the information immediately. Within 2 days, the former worker, now a person of interest, was brought in for questioning. Though he denied everything, his story didn't match timelines. He had no alibi for the afternoon the cement was poured. And when shown photos of the dog in the wall, his reaction was cold, unbothered. There wasn't enough evidence to press charges yet, but the case remained open. And now the city knew. Meanwhile, the Daltons focused on Shadow. Every day, he grew stronger. He followed Ella like a guardian, ate from her hand, and slept at the foot of her bed. And Ella, with her gentle voice and open heart, treated him like he'd always been part of the family. One afternoon, while watching them play in the yard, Mrs. Dalton whispered, "This wasn't just a rescue. It was a second chance for all of us." Mr. Dalton nodded. "And maybe the start of something bigger." They didn't know yet how far this story would go, or how many hearts it would reach. But they did know one thing for sure. Shadow had been buried in silence until a baby's voice brought him back. A week after Shadow came home, something incredible began to unfold, something the Daltons never expected. The story, which had quietly traveled through their small neighborhood, suddenly found its way onto a local news website. It featured a photo of Mr. Dalton carrying Shadow, covered in dust, with Ella pointing at the crumbled wall in the background. The headline read, "Toddler's Instinct Saves Trapped Puppy from Sealed Wall, a Miracle Rescue." Within hours, the article spread like wildfire. By the next morning, major news outlets picked it up. Reporters called. A camera crew came to the neighborhood. People all over the country were suddenly captivated by the unbelievable story of a toddler who had heard a faint sound when no one else did and led her father to save a life buried in stone. Mrs. Dalton was hesitant about the attention at first. "We didn't do this for the spotlight," she told the first interviewer. "We just couldn't ignore that something felt wrong." But as more people reached out, animal rescue groups, volunteers, even veterinarians offering free checkups for Shadow, they realized this story had become something more. It was a symbol. People saw in Shadow not just a dog, but hope, survival, a reminder that even when life seems buried, forgotten, or silenced, someone will always hear. Someone will always care. Ella, unaware of her sudden fame, continued playing in the backyard, running around with Shadow at her heels. They had developed a rhythm. She'd run ahead, then pause, turn around, and laugh when he caught up. Her laughter had become brighter. Shadow, once so weak, was now bounding behind her, tail high, legs strong. "He looks like he was never broken," Mr. Dalton whispered one afternoon as he watched them. "That's because someone refused to let him stay broken," Mrs. Dalton replied, glancing lovingly at their daughter. That week, a large animal welfare organization reached out with a proposal. They wanted to feature Shadow's story in a national campaign promoting animal rescue and awareness about animal cruelty. They asked the Daltons for permission to share the full journey, complete with Ella's part in it. The family agreed, as long as the message stayed true. This wasn't about fame or praise. It was about empathy, about listening even when the world is noisy, about paying attention to the faint cries no one else hears. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and cast golden light across their backyard, Mr. Dalton sat with Ella and Shadow on the porch steps. The little girl rested her head against Shadow's side. He didn't move, just stayed still and calm, as if protecting her in his own quiet way. "Do you know what you did, baby?" Mr. Dalton asked softly. Ella blinked up at him. "I heard him." He nodded. "That's right. And because you heard him, the whole world listened." The simplicity of her answer brought tears to Mr. Dalton's eyes. In a world so often distracted and fast-moving, it had taken a child's pure heart to recognize a cry for help and respond. The silence that had once trapped Shadow was now echoing in hearts around the country. Letters began arriving, some from children who had rescued animals of their own, others from people who had felt forgotten, left behind, or unheard. They wrote about how Shadow's story gave them strength. "I was lost too," one handwritten note said, "but now I believe someone might still find me." The Daltons read every letter. They kept them in a special box beside Shadow's new bed, because this wasn't just a story about a dog. It was about listening. It was about saving what others missed. And it all began with a little girl who refused to walk past a wall. 2 months after the rescue, The cracks in Shadow's body had healed, but more miraculously, so had the ones in his spirit. He had gone from a quiet, trembling pup to a confident companion, always at Ella's side like a shadow that had come to life. The Daltons had officially adopted him. A shiny new collar with his name, etched in silver, hung proudly around his neck. His medical records were complete, his shots up to date, and he had a cozy bed, though most nights he preferred curling up at the foot of Ella's. But despite all the healing, one thing still lingered: the mystery of who sealed him in. The former construction worker remained under investigation. Though authorities suspected him, no one had come forward with direct proof. Still, the message had been sent loud and clear. Someone had tried to erase a life and failed. Because love had intervened. Now, Shadow's story wasn't just national, it had become a symbol. Animal rescue organizations shared his face on posters. Here the silence act with compassion. A major animal shelter used Ella and Shadow's bond in a campaign to encourage adoptions, reminding people that kindness doesn't always bark. It sometimes just waits to be heard. At home, life was simple, peaceful. Shadow would chase butterflies with Ella in the backyard, then rest beside her during story time. Mr. Dalton began journaling the entire experience, with encouragement from neighbors who believed the world needed the full story. Then came the call that changed everything again. Publisher from a children's book company had read about Ella and Shadow. She asked if the Daltons would consider turning the story into a picture book for children everywhere to learn about compassion, courage, and listening to what others ignore. They agreed. And soon, Shadow in the Wall was born. The book told the tale in simple words. A little girl hears a sound, tells her daddy, and together they save a hidden puppy. It ended with a powerful line. She didn't need to understand the words. She just knew someone needed her. The book became a surprise hit. Schools invited the Daltons to speak. Animal shelters organized reading events. Ella, too young to understand the ripple effect she had started, simply smiled when people told her she was brave. To her, she had just helped a friend, but what began as a rescue had turned into a movement. Donations to shelters surged. More dogs were adopted. Families shared their own stories of second chances. And through it all, Shadow stood beside the little girl who heard him when the world didn't. Mr. Dalton often looked at them and thought of that night, the sound, the hammer, the dust, the heartbeat behind the wall. He realized now it wasn't just the dog they had saved. It was the belief that even the quietest cry matters. That even if the world is busy, broken, or too loud to care, one child's heart can cut through the noise. One afternoon, as the sun glowed over their lawn, Ella sat on a blanket drawing with crayons. Shadow lay beside her, his eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. She held up her picture to her dad. It was a drawing of a wall with a tiny ear pressed against it, and a smiling dog on the other side. "What's this?" he asked. Ella grinned. "It's me listening." Mr. Dalton smiled and kissed the top of her head. "And because you listened," he said, "a heart kept beating." And so, from the bricks of silence and a toddler's instinct, a legacy was built, not of pain, but of empathy. Not of loss, but of love. And in that home where a wall had once hidden sorrow, now lived a girl and her dog. Together, they had turned whispers into hope. Forever.